I never believed in any of that spooky stuff until I saw it with my own eyes. It was the fall of '98, and me and my buddies got this wild idea to mess around with a Ouija board. I was a skeptic, didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or any of that, but I thought it'd be a laugh. We didn't have a real Ouija board and didn't feel like driving miles to get one, so we decided to make our own. We found a piece of cardboard, wrote the alphabet on it, added a yes, no, and even drew the sun and moon in the corners. For the planchette, we cut out a triangular piece of cardboard. It didn't slide smoothly like a real one, but it did the job. Let me set the scene for you. We lived in Huntsville, Texas, and that day, a prisoner named Martin Garul, who was on death row for murder and had escaped, was found dead in the river, not too far from my friend's house. The house was old and falling apart. There was this middle room that could have been a second living area, but at the time, it was used as a bedroom. 10 of us gathered around the board in that room, the only light coming from a big cake candle. Someone suggested, "Let's talk to Garul," and we all agreed. Mark and Melissa were the ones who put their hands on the pointer. Mark had never done anything like this before, but Melissa claimed she had. They barely had their fingers over the pointer when Mark asked, "Are there any spirits out there tonight?" To everyone's shock, the pointer moved, and get this, Mark and Melissa's fingers weren't even touching it yet. They were hovering about 2 inches above it. It moved slowly, but it moved, and we were all amazed. The shock made the skeptics among us, including myself, at least curious and quiet. The pointer moved to yes. Mark then asked, "What is your name?" The board replied, in letters, but I will put it together for you all. It said, "Used to be Gurul." I was skeptical and said, "That isn't how Gurul is spelled. I thought it was Guruli." But Smith, one of the guys there, said he'd seen it in the newspapers, and it was indeed spelled Gurul. Then some weird stuff happened. Ray, who was sitting next to me, nudged me and asked, "Did you see that?" Before I could answer, Smith said, "I saw it." They said the left side of the pointer lifted up off the board and was dragging on the right. I didn't see that, but what I did see was even crazier. The couple's fingers were over the letter T, and the pointer quickly slid over to the letter A. Yet their fingers were still over the T on the other side of the board. They pulled their hands away after they saw that. I started to feel claustrophobic and stifled, like my chest was compressed and there were lumps in my throat. Then we asked the question. That made everything real. Chrissy, who was sitting on the bed about 4 feet from the board, said Martin Gurule went to high school in the Corpus Christi area but didn't know where. Chrissy knew most of the schools there because she traveled a lot as a high school FFA officer. No one else there had ever been to Corpus Christi or knew anything about it. Mark asked Gurul's spirit where he went to high school. The pointer slid to letter R, then to letter A. Chrissy's eyes watered and she moved to sit right by the board, saying, "No way." Then the pointer slid to letter Y. "The Ray Texans," Chrissy said. "It's a school in Corpus Christi." This shocked everyone. At this point, Mark ran into the kitchen and turned on the light. He had goosebumps and his eyes were watering. "I'm not going back in there, Ray," he said. "There's something around me in there." The house belonged to Ray, so he said, "Well, go ask it to leave then, because if there's something in here, I want it to go." After some time, Mark went back in and asked the entity to leave. The pointer slid to no. Mark asked again. "No." He asked a third time. "No." The pointer then slid to the middle of the board and stopped moving. It wouldn't move again. We all went back to the back porch, burned the cardboard board, and some of us lit cigarettes and smoked. When we went back inside, as soon as the last person entered the kitchen and shut the door, pots fell off the counter, and pictures under the magnets on the fridge fell to the floor. Everyone went silent. Ray and Chrissy slept in another room that night and took the deer heads off the wall. They didn't want the dead animals talking to them in the middle of the night. I understand how the mind can make people think they see things that aren't there, but that night there's no other explanation. No one in that room knew, where Gurul went to school, and the only one who knew any schools in that area was sitting away from the board. It couldn't have just randomly gone to those letters. By the end of that semester, I got on the internet and found out that Gurul did indeed attend Ray High School. A lot of strange things happened around that house after that night. I spent a lot of time over there, and the screen doors would swing wide open and shut, the power breaker would flip on and off for no reason, and the TV would turn on and off. It's possible some of that could be explained, but that night was the only time I was absolutely sure I had witnessed something supernatural. It was a stormy winter night in Abingdon, England. Abingdon's an old town built along an ancient Roman road in Oxfordshire. I was working at the venue, a local tavern, when this weird incident happened back in February 2005. That night started like any other slow night. The rain had been coming down all day, and by evening, the streets were practically deserted. We had maybe one or two patrons early on, but by the time the storm really kicked in, the place was empty. We figured we might as well call it a night. After closing up, we all gathered around the bar for a few drinks. The building has a pretty shady history. There had been fires, suicides, and even a murder within its old walls. We knew this, and as the drinks kept coming, our stories got wilder and more morbid. Everyone who worked there had a story or two about weird things that had happened. Footsteps when no one was around, cold spots, lights flickering on and off. You know, the usual haunted house stuff. One of the newer bartenders, who was really into the paranormal, suggested we try a Ouija board. I remember laughing it off at first, but the idea caught on. We didn't have a real Ouija board, so we made one out of cardboard and used an old shot glass for the planchette. It seemed like a fun way to pass the time. Before we headed upstairs, I made sure the front door was locked. I left the keys in the lock so we'd hear them jingle if anyone tried to get in. We went up to the top floor, which was always the creepiest part of the building. The lights were dim, and the place had that old, musty smell that you only find in really old buildings. We set up our makeshift Ouija board and gathered around. There were about 8 of us, and we were all a little buzzed. None of us had much experience with Ouija boards, but we figured it couldn't be that hard. We placed our fingers lightly on the shot glass and started asking questions. At first, nothing happened. We asked the usual questions. Is anyone there? What's your name? How did you die? The shot glass barely moved, and when it did, it was so slow and hesitant that we figured one of us was just pushing it to mess with the others. Then we heard a knock. It sounded like it came from the corner of the room. One of the guys had just come back from the bathroom, so we blamed him. He swore. It wasn't him, but we didn't believe him. We kept at it, asking more questions, but nothing much happened. The mood started to lighten, and soon we were just sitting around the board, joking and taunting whatever spirits might be listening. We weren't taking it seriously at all. That's when we heard the keys jingle in the front door. It was a clear, unmistakable sound. We all froze. Someone had to go check, and of course, they picked me. I headed down the stairs, a bit annoyed that I had to leave the fun. When I got to the door, there was no one there. I stepped outside, looked around, but the street was empty. The rain was coming down hard, and there was no sign of anyone. I went back upstairs and told the others. They were all excited, thinking we might have actually made contact with something. Then someone mentioned seeing a shadow move along the corner of the room by the stairs. More jokes followed, and then we heard the keys jingle again, this time followed by a heavier clatter of the door. This time, I didn't wait for anyone to tell me to go. I got up and headed down the stairs again. As I went down, I felt this cold spot halfway down the steps. It was like walking into a freezer. I slowed down, trying to figure out what was causing it. And then it happened. I felt a hand, cold and firm, press between my shoulder blades and shove me hard. I lost my balance, missed the next few steps, and went crashing down the stairs. The impact hurt like hell, even with the alcohol numbing me a bit. My friends rushed down when they heard the noise. They found me at the bottom of the stairs, the keys still swinging in the lock. They said they'd seen the shadow again at the top of the stairs, right before I fell. Later, when we reviewed the security footage, we saw an orb hovering by my head just before I was pushed. That was the final straw for us. We realized we had messed with something we didn't understand, and it had messed back. In the days following the incident, weird things kept happening at our place. Lights flickered, doors slammed, and there were more cold spots. We were all on edge, and it took a while for things to calm down. I haven't messed with a Ouija board since that night. It's not something to take lightly. If you're going to dabble in the paranormal, make sure you know what you're doing and protect yourself. We were lucky nothing worse happened, but it's not an experience I'd ever want to repeat. Back in the 80s, my twin sister Monica and I were at the same college and living in the same dorm. We were on the second floor of a 3-story building, but the third floor was always locked up and unused. One day, a blizzard hit, classes were canceled, and we were bored out of our minds. So, we decided to mess around with a Ouija board. We started with the usual silly questions, like, who's going to get married first? And believe it or not, the board seemed to have answers. Then, out of nowhere, it told us the third floor was locked because there had been a suicide up there and it was haunted. Right after that, we heard thumps and bumps coming from the third floor. We all freaked out. Once we calmed down, a spirit named Sprite came through and started talking to me. Sprite said it was mine and Monica's spirit guide. Apparently, twins share one. Then Sprite gave me a warning about the future. It said Monica would be attacked at a celebration in another town, and it would be my fault. I was confused and scared, but Sprite was super insistent that I never leave. Monica's side at any celebration we went to. It even gave me a date like 8 or 9 years into the future. Fast forward to 1996. Monica and I were at a bicentennial celebration in a nearby town. The place was packed, and it was crazy. Some friends and I wanted to hit up a certain bar, but Monica wanted to go somewhere else. We decided to split up and meet later in front of this bar. I completely forgot about the time and left Monica waiting. Some guy saw her alone and offered her a ride home. Stupidly, she agreed. On the way, he attacked her and tried to sexually assault her. She managed to throw open the car door and tumble out while he was driving to a secluded spot. While all this was happening, I realized I hadn't seen Monica in a while, but figured she'd made her way back to our motel. When I got there and she wasn't around, I started to worry. Finally, I got a call from the hospital. Monica had been admitted with a few broken bones and bruises, but she'd be okay. That's when it hit me. Sprite's warning from years ago. Monica had been attacked at a celebration, and because I forgot to meet her, it was pretty much my fault. The guilt was overwhelming, and I was totally freaked out. After that, even though it did only good for us, I swore I'd never touch a Ouija board again. When I was about 8 years old, we had a big family holiday gathering at my grandma's house. It was a full house, with me, my 2 brothers, and 5 cousins running around like we owned the place. This time, my older cousin decided to bring her Ouija board, thinking Grandma's house would be perfect for it, since it had a spooky reputation. Weird stuff happened there all the time, but nothing too scary. Most of the family just laughed it off. We headed up to one of the upstairs bedrooms to set up the board. My 2 brothers and my oldest cousin Smith, who was 12, quickly got bored and went back downstairs. That left me, the cousin who owned the Ouija board, and Smith's younger brother. We were the ones who put our hands on the pointer. We started asking questions, mostly dumb stuff. Then, out of nowhere, someone asked, "Out of all of us cousins, who will be the first to die?" The board spelled out Smith's name. We shouted down the stairs, "Smith, the Ouija board says you're gonna die." Smith didn't take it seriously. He just shrugged it off. Then we asked, "When will Smith die?" The pointer moved to 2 to 2. We yelled again, "Smith, you've got 22 years to live." After that, the Ouija board lost its appeal, and we moved on to other things. Years passed, and I forgot all about that day until March 2000. It hit me like a ton of bricks while I was carrying Smith's casket to his grave. Smith was 22 years old when he died. It wasn't 22 years later. He was 22 years old. The coincidence was overwhelming. I talked to my cousins, the ones who were with me that day. Both remembered it the same way I did, and both swore the other one moved the pointer. All my common sense tells me one of them must be lying, but I know my cousins. They wouldn't lie about something like this, not when it involves the death of someone so close to us. It's still hard to wrap my head around. Did we somehow predict Smith's death? Even now? I can't explain it. Did we somehow tap into something real that day? Was it just a creepy coincidence? I don't know, but I do know I haven't touched a Ouija board since, and I don't plan to.